And it's now recording. Fair enough. Good. I'll wait for 2 o'clock. It's 2 o'clock. So, good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the first remote Vale of Glamorgan Cabinet meeting taking place on the 13th of July 2020, commencing at 2 o'clock. For those who don't know me, I'm Councillor Neil Moore. I'm leader of the Council and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources. I'd like to remind members and officers, we have officers present too, that this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Vale of Glamorgan website as soon as practicable after this meeting. As I said, as you may know, this is the first remote Vale of Glamorgan Cabinet meeting taking place since the 23rd of March 2020. And that's as a result of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. But I think it's important to note that this does not mean that the Cabinet or the Council officers have not met in the meantime. Nothing actually could be further from the truth. In a moment, I'll ask each Cabinet member to introduce themselves, but before I do that and commence the meeting agenda, I'd like to take this time to say a few words about what has occurred since our last formal Cabinet meeting on the 23rd of March 2020. At the outset, and from the 24th of March onwards, the Council set up a Gold Command comprising of senior management team of directors, but also included several heads of service, our communications team, and very importantly, officers from emergency planning. Other officers were also invited where specialist knowledge was required, and also attending the Gold meetings with myself as leader and Deputy Leader Councillor Burnett. Initially, the Gold meeting met daily for the first several weeks, probably 10 or 11 to be honest, including many weekends. Other officers and Cabinet members met intermittently as required during other parts of the day as part of their portfolio responsibilities. So although Liz and I were in the Gold meetings, the Cabinet members still held their meetings with their respective officers. More recently, since the easing of the lockdown, the Gold team has met formally 3 days a week, but other service-specific meetings have continued as required to ensure that issues were dealt with as they arose, and there have been many, including opening of parks, car parks, etc. At this juncture, I'd like to formally thank all of those who have contributed to these meetings, which have ensured that the Council services has, in the main, continued to operate. Many members of staff have been stepped up and continued to work either by attending the offices or mostly remotely from home, as the offices were closed, and by doing so helped contain the virus. However, there were many members of staff that continued to work at the front line. They continued to collect the refuse and recycling, albeit with a slight delay in starting of the green waste services. Other members of staff carried out their demanding work in social care and the care home sector, and they looked after the most frail and vulnerable in our society with the same dedication as they always do. We must also thank our teaching and school support staff who initially kept our schools open, and then in school hubs, where they looked after our key workers, children and many vulnerable children. They've also included providing meals and packed lunches during those troubling times, so we have not let anybody down as far as I can see. I can't fail to mention our cleaning staff, who have made sure our workplaces were kept clean and ensured our staff working in various locations were safe and helped prevent the spread of COVID-19. In terms of my portfolio, there's been a great deal of work organising tests for staff and certain groups of residents alike. I'm proud of the way in which that was organised, and that's down to our HR team and emergency planning. Similarly, I have to thank our finance and regenerations team, who have given out approximately almost 25.5 to 26 million pounds worth of grants and arranged for business rates to be given breaks that Welsh Government have agreed and hopefully will pay us something towards it, if not all of it. I could go on, but I have to leave something for my Cabinet colleagues to expand upon. Personally, I've also had constant contact with the other 22 leaders in Wales, and that's been quite enlightening, to be honest. Meeting with them daily initially, and then for the first 2 months, and then 3 times a week, and also meeting with Welsh Government ministers on a weekly basis too. So I have to thank the 22 leaders who have always worked together, despite the fact that they may come from different political parties. And I'd also like to thank the Welsh ministers who've actually given up their time to actually come and talk to us directly. And they've told us about things that are going to happen. The announcements are made every day at 12:30. So actually, it's been a very good scenario in terms of that, albeit it came about because of COVID-19. I've also met with the Welsh Local Government Association officers, other Welsh councillors, and various ministers as part of my portfolio brief, and I know that my cabinet colleagues have done something similar. I'm sorry taking up the time in making this statement, but I think it's important to realise that none of us have sat back during this pandemic. It has been a difficult time and much work has gone on in the background, and I think it's important that anyone listening or watching this transmission is in no doubt of the amount and complexity of the work our staff have carried out to keep the majority of our services in operation. It's enough for me in terms of that, but I think it's a huge gratitude we have to give to our staff, and I don't want it not to be said. I'd now like to continue the agenda in some respects, but I'd like to ask my cabinet colleagues to also introduce themselves, their portfolios, and if they wish to make a few comments about the work in their portfolio. And so I will ask them in alphabetical order, perhaps would be good. Councillor Burnett first, please.
Thank you. So I'm Liz Burnett, Deputy Leader of the Council and Cabinet Member for Education and Regeneration. If I could, I'll comment later when we're discussing the report.
Indeed. Next to introduce is Councillor Ben Gray.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm Ben Gray. I'm Cabinet Member for Social Care and Health. As the Leader laid out, we've been meeting weekly as an informal Cabinet, but since the beginning of this, I've been meeting weekly, and in addition, as issues have arisen with officers within social services, but also across the Regional Partnership Board with colleagues in the Health Board, as well as the Welsh Local Government Association Social Services Network, which submit and again have had those briefings from ministers. Reflecting on what the Leader has said, responding to this emergency has been an incredibly complex task with many moving parts and one that is not over yet. I'd like to pay particular tribute to the staff both within and outside the council who've continued to provide care to the most vulnerable members of our local community. The public awareness of work that care homes do has increased dramatically, but the care needs extend beyond the walls of care homes. Those staff that have continued to visit private homes and provide that personal care, the staff that have continued to support those with profound disabilities, and our social workers who've continued to work and assess to protect the most vulnerable children and adults in our community. There have been difficult decisions since we last met as a Cabinet, which have needed to be made, including suspending day services and restricting access to care homes. These have been some of the most challenging issues to confront, as I know what support these are to those who are able to see loved ones. I want to pay tribute to the officers within the council who've worked 7 days a week at times to build effective relationship with our care providers and the Health Board, which has led to the groundwork enabling us to dispatch the right PPE to the right places at the right time. But I go back to the carers. These are the key workers who've been putting themselves in harm's way to provide the most dedicated support to our most vulnerable, and I can't thank them enough. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Ben. Next Cabinet Member is Councillor King.
Yes, thanks so much, Leader. I'm a councillor for the Cornerswell ward in Penarth and the Cabinet Member responsible for neighbourhood services and transport. And I'd like to just follow up a point about my involvement since the coronavirus lockdown started. And like everybody else, I found new ways of working, great use of the phone, email, and obviously virtual meetings. And I think I made a personal reduction in my carbon footprint just by virtue that it took me 3.5 months to fill up with petrol. and maybe some of the lessons learnt will inform my future work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Peter. Next one, Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Leader. I'm Councillor Margaret Wilkinson, Cabinet Member for Housing and Building and Member for Gibbonsdown Ward. I'd like to thank all the staff, but especially Mike Ingram's staff in homes for you and all the homeless section. All the housing section has worked very, very well. We have had extra people coming through because of domestic abuse. There is increased quite a lot in men and women, and the homeless team has worked very great to keep it all under control and other homeless people. The building part of our properties are still going ahead. The houses are still being built. They did stop for a couple of weeks, but they are all back on site, so that is something to look forward to. But once again, I'd like to thank every member of the Vale of Glamorgan Council. They have worked very, very hard. All the workers and other councillors as well kept up all the work for this council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. And sorry, Catherine, I should have brought you in first. So, Catherine McGaffer.
Thank you, Leader. I'm Councillor Catherine McGaffer. I'm the Plymouth Ward member in Penarth and the Cabinet Member for Leisure, Arts, Culture and Youth Services. I absolutely agree with what the Leader's been saying. It's great to be able to take this opportunity formally to thank all of the staff who've been working so hard to keep services in place for everyone who needed them. And a lot of them have had the ability to be able to adapt to differing roles within the council to make sure that everything keeps running smoothly. It's been really important for myself as a Cabinet Member to maintain contact with all of our officers that have been here, because it's been really difficult for them too, changing their working environments, sometimes being at home on their own, and in order to maintain that contact and make sure that they're safe and well themselves in order to provide the services for everybody else. The youth service team have been really physically and digitally active with all the young people in our area. They've distance visited some of our younger people to offer support and guidance, and there's a fully functioning youth provision going on digitally as we speak across the Vale. In regard to the arts, we've launched an online art exhibition which has been really popular so far. We've got 80 entries, and art has come to the forefront in a crisis time like this because it allows people to generate their emotions and feelings in some form or another. So everyone's really looking forward to being able to view that exhibition online, and it gives everyone a chance for a bit of cohesion to understand how everybody else has been feeling through this really difficult moment. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Catherine. Eddie Williams. You're on mute. Eddie, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. It's typical, isn't it? Right. Okay. I'm Cabinet Member for Regulatory Services, Legal Services and Planning. All of these functions have been continuing under changing circumstances over the last weeks. We know on a daily basis that the regulations are changing, and even today we're getting more changes that the council have had to implement. Particularly the regulatory services and the legal services have to keep up to date with those, and they've managed that outstandingly. It's excellent to see that as a council we've been able to progress those forward. Planning has continued. There are over 160 applications have gone through, 131 of them being delegated. You will see a lot of the information that's in previous reports, particularly this under the last April meeting. I just want to thank the staff. Without doubt, it's from the public. They won't see the amount of time and effort that they've been doing 7 days a week. And from my personal point of view, I thank them that they've been able to do this without any pressure. They've willingly taken it on board. So my thanks to them.
Thank you, Eddie. Item on the agenda is apologies for absence. There are none. Next item is the minutes for approval. I have one correction. That is on the minutes, pages 294 to 299 should actually read C 294 to C 299, which shows it's a cabinet minute. So with that amendment, Can I formally move the minutes, and wondered if anybody else would like to second it, please.
Formally second.
With
I'll
that,
second.
with that amendment, happy to second.
I'm happy to second.
Everybody in agreement? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next, go on to the items proper in the cabinet report. The first cabinet report is to provide the cabinet with an overview of the work undertaken to develop a recovery strategy for the organisation following the COVID pandemic and approval for the approach. This is quite a comprehensive and very full report. I make no apology for actually reading most of it out. I think it's important. We've talked about the fact that our officers have done so much work, and this actually shows some of the stuff. So basically, what this report provides is Cabinet with an overview of the work undertaken to develop a recovery strategy. This doesn't go in fact of the areas that we've carried out during the pandemic, and in fact, if you look at the background papers, then you can see other reports which have been circulated so that everybody, all councillors, know what has gone on. So there's background papers. This relates to the recovery strategy for the council following the outbreak. The previous updates, as I said, have been provided to members and referred in the background papers. The report provides Cabinet with an opportunity to consider the phases of response, the transition and recovery associated with the pandemic, and it gives an update on the current status of the Council's work. The report seeks approval for the approach to developing the recovery strategy, including a recommendation to refer this report to the Scrutiny Committee Corporate Performance and Resources for that committee's views to be considered on the proposed approach, and I think that will probably take place this Wednesday. In order to continue to, this report also is there in order to continue to keep stakeholders updated on the Council's work, and it's also recommended that this report therefore be sent to all elected members, town and community councillors, and members of the Public Service Board for their information. I will go through the fact that there are recommendations, and I will give the recommendations. The first one is that it is recommended that Cabinet note the contents of the report. The second recommendation is the recommendation that Cabinet approves the approach to the development of Council's recovery strategy and receives further updates in due course. It's recommended that the Cabinet refer, as I said, to Scrutiny Committee for its consideration and views on the approach being developed and adopted in terms of a recovery strategy. It's also, as I said, recommended that it be sent to all elected members, town community councillors, and members of the Public Service Board for information. In terms of background, as I said, reports have previously been produced in response to the COVID-19, and they're in the background papers. And papers that are but this report and are focused on the initial services responses, emergency planning mechanism enacted and associated governance arrangements. The most recent reports provide an overview of the way in which services were operating within the regulations and guidance from Welsh Government and UK Government. I think it has to be emphasised that the Council continues to respond to the pandemic, and many services are continuing to operate in different ways for business as usual. We have had to make many changes. There are changes are rapidly changing the position in terms of that, with the ongoing easing of the lockdown restrictions, and hopefully we'll continue to have that easing of lockdown and we won't have another spike. The Council's emergency management arrangements have been extended, as I said, to the corporate management team and the Goal Command, as I mentioned earlier. In recent weeks, as well as managing the response to the pandemic, we've turned this to recovery, and it has wide-ranging and wide-reaching issues for the public of the Vale of Glamorgan. So the key framework for recovery is that initial activity within the services to date, as I said, has been there to react Given the breadth of the services operated by the council, this phase will continue for continuing length of time. COVID-19 hasn't gone away. We've altered the way we worked and we'll continue to have to work that way. However, in the short to medium term, services will begin to move out of response and into a transition phase. And that's what this report is basically about. The management of that phase will be focused on the lockdown, but obviously has to recognise the services can't operate as usual, and will also have to have bearing on what Welsh Government tell us. It's always possible, and I think it has to be emphasised that should there be a spike, then these recovery phases could turn back into where we were during the pandemic. The recovery work will involve long-term consideration of how the council will work in the future, learning from the pandemic and the pressures and demands upon it. It is not going to be the same as it was before. The response, well, we've described in previous reports. We're focusing on the critical services. The objectives of the response have been basically to care for our most vulnerable, to maintain and manage our public spaces, to ensure lockdown measures were in place, and to support our workforce to work flexibly and safely from their place of work or from home. We've also concentrated on support to our partners, help to keep businesses sustainable by giving out the grants, as I talked about earlier, and I think Liz might talk about it later. We've kept the council running in terms of finance and governance, and we've tried to keep everybody informed as best as possible. As I said, that's been coordinated through the Gold team, and that will continue. It's specifically in the early days talked about PPE issue. That was a particular bit of a crisis because there wasn't enough about. We have looked at the transition of the recovery, and we will continue to do that. So what's continued? For most of the services continued, albeit in different ways to different extents. There are some clear exceptions, such as schools, for example. We know schools were shut down, but we kept our key workers and vulnerable children in some of those areas, and we've continued to have some social service provisions. Was stopped? Largely face-to-face services only, such as reception areas, as the council offices have been closed down, and clearly that's a part of the recovery process. There have been some changes in terms of the work that needed to be completed in the capital programme, as well as intervention and prevention services. So some things have slowed down and some have changed altogether. What's been done differently? Well, we've changed the way that we worked and the emphasis on digital methods such as video conferencing, such as this. I'm working from home, members are working from home, some members are in the office. Staff have been used in different ways within schools, teachers, learning support assistants, providing childcare. We've repurposed staff to go out and help with the PPE provision. We've had people who are usually in a workforce and a workplace have changed and gone elsewhere and worked elsewhere, and very successfully, I have to say too. There's been an absolute willingness to experiment, to take some measured risks, which I think have to be done under the circumstances. And the projects have been driven through the at a pace which is unusual in some respects. What we learned from the phase, we've learned how to support people in different ways by working differently at home. In terms of equipment, we've had to maintain communications. That's been a struggle for everybody, I think. Everybody, in the first weeks, everybody worked at home, and the Wi-Fi and internet just could not cope. We were required to work hard in terms of ICT to support the work from home. I think that has effectively been worked on now quite well. Changes for more remote ways of working are not always positive, with some requirement of face-to-face intervention to be most effective. So we've had to use a blend and virtual ways of working, as we're doing now. But I think staff, to be honest, have adapted very quickly, and with the dedicated teams that they are, they continue to operate the services in unprecedented circumstances. how would we look at the morale of staff? I think the morale of staff has been exceptional, to be honest. There are mixed pictures in terms of morale, obviously, and we've reflected on different ways in which personal experiences have affected the way the colleagues work. But we have a balanced way of working, I think, but it's all down to the commitment of the staff more than anything else. There's been obvious issues in terms of caring responsibilities because our staff have their own families. Some people have had to self-isolate, some people have been shielded, and so it's been difficult for some members of staff who have had those caring responsibilities to carry out the work, but many have, and most have in fact, and work flexibly around that. We've talked to staff, we've asked staff what they thought, and basically it's been welcomed. Results have been subject to an initial analysis, and they're attached at the report at Appendix A to the report, which I won't go into, that you see for yourself. They will continue to be analysed further so that we can learn more lessons. What demands and issues are emerging? Well, finally, services. We're asked about demands and issues. There is obviously an impact in terms of transition and recovery. We need to work flexibly. There's expectations of working practices will change. Working hours are changing. The working environment has changed. Some public services have ceased working, such as the core services. And when they restart, that'll have an increased demand on our service, such as housing and the homelessness support. But again, in terms of homelessness, we have actually put there have been not many, if any, rough sleepers on the street. I know one person who didn't want to be picked up, but most of them were. We need to undertake the work to identify new priorities and then emerging areas of demand, because things are going to be different. We have to look at phasing the lockdown, as I say, but we will still have a series of objectives for this phase of work. We have to ensure that we manage and mitigate the risks for the longer term recovery and easing. We will continue to respond to changes in lockdowns, and we need to refocus some of the issues in terms of scientific evidence around the R value and Welsh Government advice. We need to consider the crisis has made us think differently in terms of the way we communicate and how we serve. We need to support our staff and elected members and residents. We need to communicate and engage with the people better. The key issues in the next couple of weeks will be focused in several areas. We need to consider the reopening of schools. I know we worked for 3 weeks and had some check-in catch-up prior to the summer holidays. But as we move forward, and we need to focus on how that will affect the new academic year. We've had to look at the reopening of non-essential retailing. So we've done a lot of work in preparation of our town centres in order to offer a safe environment for our shoppers and businesses, and that's not been easy. Each town is slightly different, and the nature and characters have to be individually reviewed. But again, we've made some measures, but they will be closely monitored. Another area has been the management of parks and resorts, and we know that all our car parks in coastal and coastal areas and those areas of destinations were closed down. We've had to start those back up, but there's been some consequences in terms of car parking and displacement parking, and as a result, we need to better management the situation in car parks when they were opened from mid-June. We have to make sure that, for example, when we had a hot and sunny weather, we had some areas which were closed down, caused some problems for local residents and displacement parking. But we are considering action in terms of that for the future. We had to close down toilet facilities, but that's now reopened, so that was a recovery which we had to reconsider. As I said, it's going to take some time to recover from this, and the views of the corporate performance Resources Committee members will be vital. We'll develop in line with the Council's emergency planning procedures in managing the recovery. And as I say, emergency planning has been a major plank in terms of the goal meetings. We have to recognise this is not recovery to a previous state for all services. There will be time to reflect on the significant changes. We need to identify this as an opportunity, I think, in the way that we work as a council. We need to inform the recovery of work, the service areas we covered, such as schools, public confidence, availability of staff, because that will still be an issue. We have to look at some themes of like health and social care, community and community, the learning community, the public realm and public space to make sure it's safe. But we also have to continue to work with the business and economy and the infrastructure, and not forgetting the environment. So basically, immediately we had to deal with some issues. We've had a lot of threats and opportunities, and they're covered on 237 and 236 in the report, which I won't dwell on. But I think I've said enough really. Next steps is it's proposed that the themes identified in the columns of 236, etc., need to be considered. They need to be used to develop a series of strategic actions to form the basis of a recovery strategy. Whilst this is underway, we'll obviously have to have an analysis of the inequalities and economic impact that the coronavirus will have taken on us. It's basically a situation where we have to be very careful when we go forward. But as I say, basically, to use the mantra, we will be in a new normal, whatever that may look like. So basically, the report is there, the recommendations are before you. I apologise that I've dragged on too long, but I think it's important to realise that we've done a lot of work and there's a lot of work still to be done, and that always depends on the R value still coming down, and hopefully no more cases at all. So I don't know if any member wishes to make any comments in relation to their own service area. Liz.
Thank you, Leader. I took the opportunity to make a few notes about my portfolio area, because there's been quite a lot of work going on. And so I'd like to mention what's been going on over the past 3 months, and in doing so, recognise the absolutely Herculean effort that all in the education and regeneration teams have made. Just a few of the points. You mentioned about how our schools became childcare hubs, but not how, with only 48 hours notice, they turned into childcare providers, and how in another 48 hours, they formed into 14 hubs across the Vale to support key workers and our most vulnerable families. They worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week to provide support in those hubs. They also, alongside that, provided homeschooling support and organised deliveries of food to many vulnerable families. Yeah. Our children weren't left without IT connectivity. IT have provided 760 laptops or tablets to children, and 208 MiFi devices for children that didn't have broadband. More recently, our schools have welcomed children back, and the images on social media shows just how pleased they are to be there. Big Fresh Catering, who do the school meals, have also stepped up. They've provided breakfast, lunch and an evening snack within the hubs. They've coordinated deliveries of thousands of vouchers for children who normally receive free school meals, and also grab bags of packed lunches. Staff within the catering service have also been redeployed to support care homes and other services that needed catering support. Our libraries have really embraced digital services. You can sign up. They organised that you could sign up to the library online. 425 people took advantage of that. to access e-books, e-magazines, and even the sort of newly free service of Ancestry.com. Our librarians have done their popular rhyme and science and storytime sessions now online. There are reading groups on WhatsApp, Zoom and Facebook. There's even an online Lego club. Again, everybody's happy to see the library starting to come back, and they now have a click and collect service. Our adult community learning team, they've provided homework packs for all their students. The essential skills and English as a second or other language have virtual classrooms. There are lessons being delivered on Zoom. And then once recorded, they're on Facebook. Welsh for Adults are on Zoom. And even the popular summer school arts and crafts activities plan to be delivered online. So that's a flavour of education. We haven't actually stopped our 21st Century Schools building programme, but delivered it in a very socially distanced way. The new build at Pencoedra High School has started, and that complements Whitmore High School that's progressing really fast, and the work at Ysgol Bro Morgannwg. In the next few months, we should see 3 new primary schools considered at planning committee, one of which will be low carbon and the other 2 zero carbon, which I understand will be the first in Wales. In such difficult times, it's important to keep employment going where possible. And this is evident with the economic impact of our school buildings programme. So far, 90% of contracts in Whitmore High School have been awarded to businesses in South East Wales. That's £16,430,000 that's been put into the South East Wales economy. 40% of the workforce at Whitmore High School and 66% of the workforce at Ysgol Bro Morgannwg is from the local postcode. So it's really, really important that we are providing that level of economic input into the local community. In keeping going, the contractors have developed high levels of understanding of how you achieve social distancing within school buildings, and that was used to support schools in planning to return, and they developed an app for schools and parents to use. Just a bit of a flavour about what's going on in schools, and then we've got the ever flexible regeneration team. They have supported local businesses, making sure current information was immediately available. They've worked with our finance team, and as Neil mentioned, have processed £25.5 million in grants to over 2,000 businesses, and they're currently working on the startup grants. They've been working to help town centres and tourism businesses move forward after lockdown, which hasn't been easy because a lot of people don't understand that we need to make space for pedestrians in our town centres to socially distance. So sometimes we need them to be able to step off the pavement into a parking space. They've supported the Vale Heroes initiative, helping to get information to go on that website, and they've set up a PPE procurement initiative to complement the supplies that we get centrally in Wales to make sure that care homes and providers and schools always had the stock that they needed. The leaders has outlined the way forward during recovery phase, and the one that my teams will be focusing on is supporting learning and employment and sustainable economic growth. We'll be working with schools to plan for September. And I don't think we can overstate the need for action when we see figures like 10% unemployment in our 16 to 24-year-olds currently. Economic activity will be very high on our list going forward. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Liz. Peter, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thanks. That's if I may, please. I recognise this report is one going forwards, but I would like to go back to paragraph 2.9, which allows me to echo some of the leaders' opening comments and pay tribute to the frontline staff within my portfolio, and specifically the waste and recycling teams who maintain doorstep collections throughout. They reintroduced garden waste after a short delay, and then this was followed up once the lockdown relaxation allowed it, to the opening of the household waste and recycling centre, which quite frankly it's been such a success. We might even continue with a pre-booking arrangement in the future. I think it's equally right for me to thank those who contributed to the work to clean our streets and collect litter and indeed fly tipping, as well as those who've maintained our parks and playing fields. And really, what I want to say is these are all services we're inclined to take for granted, except when they don't get done. And so I just want to place on record my sincere appreciation of each and every individual who has helped keep those services functioning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Does anybody else like to come in at this stage? Eddie, do you want any further comments?
No, recognising that we've gone through quite a bit of turmoil over the last few months, but clearly the next few months we're in new territory. The business that we do isn't the same as we've done in the past, and we'll recognise that, as Peter just said about the waste management and Liz about the education, those things are happening, but they will be different. And clearly from the services that we provide, the regulatory and the legal, that they're influencing how those are implemented as well. It's just this way of working now. We'll probably end up with a sort of mixture of this. It'll be interesting to see where we end up. But it's clear we don't know all the answers now at the moment, and that's the key point. That this document that we're referring to now it doesn't give fine detail because we're still working things through. And as I said earlier, with a daily change on the regulations and everything else that's going on, then we just have to see how we work things through. So okay. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Eddie. I've got two people. I'll bring in Ben and I'll bring in Margaret. And then if Catherine wants to come in afterwards, she can. Ben, do you want to come in this time?
Thank you, Leader. I was just going to say I'm fully supportive of this report. I think it lays the groundwork out really clearly as to all the areas that need to be considered by the council. As Councillor Williams referred to, clearly the detail will begin to be built on this, but this really does underline the themes we've been discussing weekly, and I know you've been dealing with daily on your gold meetings, about what the council's been going through and how we can begin to think about what needs to happen in the future. In terms of within my own portfolio, clearly we've had to move to some virtual services to provide that contact, and it may be that some of our users quite like the virtual contact and may want to have that alongside some face-to-face contact. So there are some opportunities that come out of having a good long look at what we've been doing that may be to the benefit of our service going forwards. But I'm really happy to support this, vote for this report to go forwards. I hope we can have a really constructive scrutiny meeting about this later in the week, and all members can feed into that. But I think it really clearly lays out all the factors that need to be considered when looking at the whole council approach to how we recover. So I'd like to thank them for putting this together. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Margaret.
Like everybody else, I'd like to thank the officers that's put this report together. It is something that we have to do and look forward to working with everybody to go forward. The staff and the officers has worked miracles, I believe, in this virus, and we all have to stick together and make this council the best council again, and I'm sure it will. But we have a lot to do in the future, but this is a start and it's a good document and I support it.
Thank you, Margaret. Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, it has been such a trying time for everyone, both in the council and outside. But it's so good to know that we have some recovery plans moving forward. So from my own personal point of view, it's so complex to reopen the leisure centres. But as soon as we have guidelines from Welsh Government, we are really looking forward to everyone coming back and enjoying the facilities, which is so important for so many people's well-being and health. The youth service are reinstating their youth engagement programme, which means with our partners, so we can assist all the young people who've been out there and kind of a bit of a loss. It's so hard to be a teenager in this particular environment. They're trying to find a sense of selves, and they just are being restricted in ways they just don't understand and can't deal with. We've also got our play teams moving forward, so we can provide our play provision in the summer for our children who really need it and rely on that service. And it's so good to know that we'll be able to open our outside play areas shortly as well, because children are definitely missing being able to go and play on that equipment. The community centres are on the verge of reopening as well, and we should be shortly having some guidelines from government about that, which is very important again for all of our communities across the Vale. And it's, like I said, just such a trying time for everyone in so many different ways, but all we can currently rely on, like everyone said, is change. And we just need to be able to embrace those changes as we move forward. All of our staff have been amazing in looking at different ways to do stuff and working a lot more cohesively than ever before. And we just, like Councillor Williams said, we just need to be prepared to see what our new reality looks like. But we're all here to support our communities and our staff. So thank you.
Good, thank you. Finally, I'd like to see if our Managing Director, Rob Thomas, wants to say a word or two. Rob, are you there? Well, I know you're on the line.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just to flag up a couple of issues with the report. In terms of key points, if I may. The section at the bottom of page 4, paragraph 2.4, I think is a really useful summary of where we are, the way we are looking at the framework moving forward. As you've already mentioned, we've been in the response phase to the virus for coming up to 3 months now. And we're to some extent, we're still in that response phase because things are changing weekly, even daily in some instances. But what the text there demonstrates is that we are now also in the transition phase out of response and into recovery. And some of those transition elements of work are issues that are very much the here and now. So things that you've mentioned already, like the opening of our parks, the opening up of our town centres, looking at how we can adapt our office environments, our workplaces, and that involves keeping an eye on the R rate across the Vale and also Wales constantly as we move through that transition phase. So that's covered in the report, but what's also covered in the report then is the longer term recovery. And if you, as you suggested earlier, if you look at some of the themes that we've drawn out in terms of our recovery phase, we've looked at 6 themes in particular. So the recovery in the health and social care service, the community and the humanitarian theme, that is around our housing supply, for example, and homelessness provision. Learning continuity is going to be absolutely vital moving forward in terms of how our schools function come September and how we can get through the curriculum. How we reopen our public realm and our public spaces to people who want to enjoy those areas. Our parks, our coastal resorts is a big theme for us. And then a very big area across Wales, but also in the Vale, is how we respond to those challenges around the economy and business and infrastructure requirements. And finally, looking at the environmental issues as a result of coronavirus and how we can possibly take what we've seen in recent months with the reduction in traffic, the reduction in pollution, and how we can take those forward. And our strategy in the report is really to consider those themes against our corporate plan. As you know, our corporate plan is relatively new. It was adopted by the council just before COVID-19 basically affected our day-to-day working. And an important area for us is going to be then to look at those themes and to reflect on how it impacts our corporate plan moving forward. And that really summarises how we're going to take the recovery work forward, how we're going to assess the impact of coronavirus on all those important policies that we set out for ourselves just before coronavirus impacted on the way we all live our lives and the way we run the organisation and the way businesses run. So that's really all I've got to say, but that is really looking forward in terms of how we take our recovery work.
Indeed, thank you. And the other thing is, of course, we have to rely on the public in terms of helping with the recovery, and they have to realise that the COVID-19 is still out there and is still a risk, and some of the scenes that we've seen lately are not helpful. So, the plea from me and from the rest of us is, look, be careful. We are on a recovery stage, but it could quite easily just go backwards, and we could go back to where we were on the 23rd of March. Yeah. So this is a report about recovery. Hopefully we can do that, but we can only do that if the public come with us, and people have to be responsible. As I kept on saying all the time, people still have to take responsibility for themselves and the well-being of others. And that's the reason why we've done what we've done in town centres. That's the reason we closed things off, and the reason we've tried to be reasonable with people. We've learnt some lessons in terms of things like displacement parking, and we'll have a report come in to our cabinet shortly in terms of that, so we can use that as part of the learning lesson of COVID-19. But in terms of the recommendations, they are before you, and I have read them out. I'm not going to read them again. Can I ask for everybody's adoption of those recommendations, please? Are there any easiest way is, are there any dissenters? I don't think there actually are.
Formally second.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. The next item is in relation to the Vale Glamorgan Service Board Annual Report 2019-20. And this report really is to present an overview of the second year of progress in delivering the wellbeing objectives and actions set out by the Vale Public Service Board and its wellbeing plan. The wellbeing plan was initially launched in May 2018, so it's a while ago, but since its launch, partners have been working to progress the wellbeing objectives and the actions aligned to those objectives. To capture the progress made in the second year of the wellbeing plan, they've had to produce an annual report in the form of a SWAY report, which is attached to this this report, and it's an excellent report. It has lots of interactive areas within it, and I would recommend everybody read it. It does give an overview of the progress that has been made by partners in implementing the 4 wellbeing objectives and activities detailed in the plan against the work streams. It is published. The PSB met last Friday and adopted it. It is on the PSB website, and there's a link attached to this report. The recommendations are that we review, if we wish to, the Public Services Annual Report, but it is very, very comprehensive. And progress the partners and the progress partners are making in implementing the priorities. Cabinet are asked to make any recommendations, if we wish to the PSB regarding that progress. We're also asking to consider the services that continue to contribute towards the successful delivery of the PSB. And I think basically what's happening is that all parties within the authority are working together to achieve that, and that this again is referred to corporate performance resources for their consideration. And then if they have any to be sent back to here so that we can send them to the Public Service Board. As I said, basically the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015 formally established public service boards, and they've met since then. What they must do is assess the state of the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of the local area, which is the Vale Glamorgan. It sets out the local objectives that are designed to maximum the contribution within the area and to achieve those goals, well-being goals, and to take all reasonable steps to meet those objectives. Basically the four objectives of well-being objectives of the PSB's objectives are to enable people to get involved, participate in local communities and shape local services. 2, to reduce poverty and tackle inequalities linked to deprivation. 3, to give children the best start in life. And 4, to protect, enhance and value the environment. PSB has to publish an annual report annually, and this is their second report. It does identify areas of work, including the need for the PSB to consider the impact of COVID-19. I don't know if people understand, but there are 4 statutory partners to this. They are the Vale Glamorgan Council, Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, South Wales Fire and Rescue Service and Natural Resources Wales. Adjunct to that are other members who were invited from various sectors, including voluntary sector, town and community councils, etc. But all the board members are listed within the report itself. This year they have 4 work streams, and that is the Cardiff and Vale Move More Eat Well plan, and that's led by Cardiff and Vale University Health Board. The second priority is tackling climate change, and that's led by this authority and Natural Resources Wales. The third one is time banking, which is led by the Vale Glamorgan Council, and the final one is improving engagement, which is led by South Wales Fire and Rescue Service. The details of each of the work streams and backgrounds are in the report itself. I don't intend to go through all of those, but they do include things like the Staff Healthy Travel Charter, which we've all signed up to, the School Health Research Network, Early Year Action Together, Glamorgan Smallholders Network, Vale Heroes and Community Safety. And within the annual report itself, it actually looks at each of those areas as an interactive section in relation to what has been done. As I say, partners have reviewed the priorities for the coming year, so we will be moving forward on our 4 work streams. Obviously, we need to involve more people, and that's why I said we need to involve more strongly the town and community councillors and children and young people in its work. Although I have to say that there was a workshop which involved young people, and it related to climate change, and that was very enlightening indeed. And I think most of the cabinet members were there on that day. The PSB are confident that the working together and by working differently will continue to have a positive plan. As I say, the Service Board annual report is appended to this report, and basically I will move the recommendations. But before I do, I'm going to ask one of their officers, one of the ones whose team helped to put it together, including himself. I wondered if Tom Bowring wanted to say a couple of words before I call in any of the members for any comments. Tom, I think you're here. Yeah. If any comments, please.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Leader. Just in addition to the comments that you were making about the PSB discussing the report at its meeting on Friday, and it did approve the report then, there was a conversation with partners about the importance of partnership working continuing as we go through into the recovery phase that you were just discussing on the previous item. And it was just to give you some information that work will now commence. So partners are going to share their recovery plans to make sure that where it's appropriate, we dovetail activity to continue to maximise the benefits that we get from the PSB and the partnership working. And just as the Managing Director was describing in terms of setting our response within the context of our corporate plan, the PSB will look to continue its work now against the wellbeing objectives, but taking into consideration the effects that the coronavirus has had.
Okay, thank you. And one of the other members I didn't mention actually, because there's the police and crime commissioners there, and the police and other services, and indeed I chair the committee, but it's the vice chair, I think, was re-elected as the assistant PCC police and crime commissioner. So it's good. Anybody, any comments? I can't see any hands up. If anybody's got any comments to make, Peter. That's a hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to speak about it. Yeah, if I can, I'd just like to make a comment about how neighbourhood services and transport are contributing to one of the 4 work streams in the report, specifically tackling climate change. We are building on our carbon reduction that we achieved with the residential road street lighting. And we're about to utilise a Salix Welsh Government grant funding towards the replacement of our main road lighting schemes and convert those to LEDs. These are even more sophisticated than the early generation. They will allow us to vary the lighting levels and give us the ability to reduce our CO2 emissions even more, and indeed reduce night light pollution. And then also, despite some of the difficulties connected with coronavirus, we are introducing e-bikes for hire, and we hope they will help residents utilise them for perhaps some of the journey that they might otherwise make by car, and complement other means of transport. But on top of which, we are hoping that once people have had a chance to try out and test an e-bike, they might even decide to go and buy one for themselves. So I like to think we are helping our bit. Thank you.
Okay, good. Has anybody else got any comments? Otherwise, I will move the recommendations. And
I'll forward the second.
Thank you. No, is any all agreed? Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, Catherine, yes, is back. She's put her camera on. Good. Thank you very much. In that case, that's moved. Item 6 is any items that decided urgent. We have none. In terms of part 2, there are no part 2 items either. So I will formally close the meeting, but thank you for attendance. Thank you all the officers who are also sitting there in the background without their cameras on, but can I thank them for attendance too. And just be safe, keep well, keep safe, and remember, it hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Okay, be good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader.